Hello and welcome to Northern Nightmares, your home for nightmarish stories throughout Canada and beyond, and I'm your host Andrew. Today I'm excited to be bringing you a story that I consider the story that started this podcast. During my week off, I focused on the coming weeks. I've planned out new stories that I'm sure you're going to love, and I spent a lot of time working on this episode. I have some new things in the works as well, but we'll get back to that later. So let's begin this week's episode. Our story takes us back to Halifax, Nova Scotia, to my favorite haunted location. In the heart of downtown, this location is just down the road from Citadel Hill, the first episode of this show. If one were to head to the corner of Argyle and Carmichael, you would find a ritzy restaurant known for offering locally sourced seafood and steak meals. This place has been open since 1975 in one of the city's many historical buildings. This is the Five Fisherman Restaurant. There's been reports of many strange occurrences involving glasses breaking, silverware moving, and even mysterious figures appearing in windows. Staff and guests have claimed to even see apparitions sitting at tables and even moving throughout the building. It's considered one of the most haunted places in Halifax because of its unsettling history. You may have noticed that this episode isn't titled The Five Fishermen, but The Ghosts of Halifax. That's because there's a few locations here all known to be haunted, and all because of two major historical events. This started as a Five Fishermen story, but evolved into more. The locations I have for this big story are all connected to the Halifax explosion. But before we get there, we need to dive into the origins of the historical building of the restaurant. So let me show you these connections and why I chose the Five Fishermen as the starting point. In 1818, Halifax was growing into a booming city, and the local church had seen this. The St. Paul Anglican Church opened a school right next to them, the future building of the Five Fishermen. This would be Canada's first school and that offered free education. With being so close to the church, they could keep a close eye on Halifax's residents, teaching religion and other important studies. However, with growing demand, the school would outgrow its size, and it would be moved to the new Dalhousie College. The school's location would be taken over by a new owner, though, by the name of Anne Lenowin. She herself has a whole, I could say, episode worthy of history, but we're not going to focus on that today. She would open a new school here called the Halifax Victorian School of Art. Anne ran this school until 1883, when she decided to move to a new location, into a bigger building, which we know as today as the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, or NSCAD for short. The old location would be taken over by the Snow family. This would be the beginning of the John Snow & Co. funeral home, and before you say it, it's not the same Jon Snow from Game of Thrones. The mortuary would play a significant part in the coming years of this story, as the Snow family would oversee many funerals soon, with not one, but two catastrophic events that changed Halifax. So let's take a dive into our first major event, as this story takes us across the ocean. If I asked you why April 10th, 1912 was a significant date in history, what would be your answer? If you said it's because the Titanic set sail, you're correct. Cue Celine Dion. Well, technically I can't play her music due to copyright laws, but I know you can hear it in your head. I know we're all familiar with this story, mostly because of the movie, but let's just take a dive into what happened so I can explain how Halifax was involved. Like I said, April 10th, 1912, the RMS Titanic set sail from Southampton, England on its maiden voyage to New York City. The ship was 882 feet and 9 inches long, with a width of 92 feet and 6 inches. It was also 104 feet high. This was the largest ship of its time. Inside, it had a total of 10 decks, starting from the top down. The first deck was the boat deck. This is where the lifeboats and staff quarters were found. Next, A deck was where the first class passengers would hang out and relax. B deck was where these passengers slept and housed public spaces like the veranda cafe. C deck was the transitional deck for both first and second class passengers to sleep. It also had the purser's office and the second class library. D deck was the saloon deck for the first and second classes to dine. E deck, or the upper deck, had cabins for all classes, and F deck, the middle deck, had the third class cabins. This deck also had a swimming pool, Turkish baths, and even a squash court. G deck, the lowest deck, had held the third class cabins, another squash court, and was also the first cargo hold. It was either this deck or the next one where Jack and Rose went heels to Jesus in the back of the old Renault Coupe de Ville car. The orlop deck is where another cargo hold was found and where crew worked. The final deck was the tank deck. This is where the engine was and housed all the machinery. These decks were all designed to separate the classes of people of the time and allow crew to work efficiently during the voyage. The grand staircase connected several of the decks. It allowed first-class passengers to travel between floors and have Jack walk down to spend the night with Rose. Now, it's thought the voyage would have taken about 5 to 7 days to arrive to the Big Apple, but we all know that never happened. 4 days after it left England, it unfortunately struck a giant iceberg just off the coast of Newfoundland. The impact had buckled the steel plates on the starboard side, tearing open 6 of the 16 watertight compartments. These compartments were in a hidden deck designed for emergencies. If any of these decks were to fill with water, the vessel was designed to stay afloat. However, it could only manage 4 flooded compartments. This flooding exceeded the limit, and as we know today, the Titanic went nose down to its watery grave. It only took 2 hours and 40 minutes later for the ship to sink and forever remain at the bottom of the sea. Only 2,224 passengers survived. 15,000 perished. This was a mix of passengers and crew. The Titanic only carried 20 lifeboats during this time, and it was not enough for everyone to get aboard them. Crews were not trained efficiently to handle evacuations. Many of the lifeboats were launched either partially filled or empty. Anyone that jumped into water, we know, died due to the frigid waters. 337 bodies were recovered. 119 of them were buried at sea. The other 209 were taken to the nearest port, which was Halifax City. 59 of the bodies were claimed by families and sent back to their homes. The other 150 were buried in Halifax. Before they were buried, though, all these bodies were placed in John Snow & Co. funeral home. The Snow family took charge of everybody, making sure everything goes to the right place and making sure they were all buried. You could say that some of the spirits, though, never left. As I said earlier, people have seen apparitions in old Victorian attire that would match the fashion of the time. The bodies were buried in Fairview Lawn Cemetery, about 10 to 15 minutes from downtown, depending on traffic. Here, you can find a special section called the Titanic Gravesite, and it's here it's said that more apparitions can be seen. From ghostly orbs and even shadowy figures, it seems like some of the spirits never moved on to the next world. But these two aren't the only place are haunted because of the Titanic. Down on the waterfront is the Halifax Maritime Museum. Now, it's not officially confirmed that it's haunted, but staff have claimed to seen lights flicker, orbs moving about, and even being pushed around. It's here you would find all kinds of history about the Halifax, including the Titanic, with displays of pieces from the ship. It could it be that some spirits are attached to these items, or could it be something else? We now have our first couple of connections for this story. However, more are coming. I would recommend you check out these places. Come to the museum to learn more about the city's rich history. Head over to the cemetery to pay your respects, and maybe you'll meet some of the ghosts that haunt these areas. Also, a little jab at the movie. There was enough room on that door for Jack. They did Leo dirty. I know the die-hard fans are just rolling their eyes. However, this isn't the end of our story yet. Now let's move on to our next big event. This would not only change the city, but change the world. This next event is important, though, as it will explain the main event that rocked our city. During the summer of 1914, the Great War would begin. On July 28, 1914, the Great War, or World War I, had begun after the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated by the hands of the Bosnia Serb nationalists. When the Austro-Hungarian Empire annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, a resistance was started, and the Bosnian Serbs sought independence and freedom from the empire. When the Archduke was assassinated, this set off a chain reaction throughout Europe. The Austria-Hungarian Empire sought to eliminate Serbia because of the attack on the Archduke. Germany backed up the empire with an ultimatum deal on July 23, 1914. Serbia did accept most of the terms, but denied the suppression of anti-Austrian propaganda and the removal of certain officials from office. Because of this, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Due to existing alliances to both these parties, other countries got involved, and the conflict quickly escalated. The central parties were Germany, Austrian-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, and Bulgaria. They fought against the allied countries of Serbia, France, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, Japan, United States, Belgium, Romania, Greece, Portugal, and several South American countries. Also, with Great Britain, they had the help from Canada, Australia, and India. The 4-year war ended on November 11, 1918. Now, I'm not going to go into any more of this war, as that's not the point of the story, but maybe one day I'll do a full series on World War I and tell you about the horrifying details that changed this world. Today, I just want to give you a little backstory, as it will help with our next major incident that Halifax was involved in. Just shy of a year before the war ended, December 6, 1917, the Halifax explosion would happen. 2 ships were in the Halifax harbor the morning of the explosion. Both were carrying supplies for the war. Halifax was a wartime port city during this time, and even today the city is still one of the largest ports in Canada. The SS Mont Blanc was a French cargo ship that was loaded with explosives. This included TNT, picric acid, gun cotton, and benzol, and it was set to head back to France. This ship was also 290 feet long and about 52 feet wide. The SS Imo was a Norwegian vessel holding relief supplies and headed back for Belgium. It too was 430 feet long and only 42 feet wide. It was due to poor navigational errors and miscommunication between the 2 vessels that the Imo was unable to avoid the Mont Blanc, and the 2 collided into each other. These weren't small ships, as both vessels were in what we called at the time the Narrows. This is the bottleneck of the harbor after you exit the ocean and into the harbor. The Narrows are also before you get to the Bedford Basin. This is a very tight space for ships, and because of this, it caused a gash in the Mont Blanc's hull, which led to the volatile materials to ignite, and the ship caught fire. Today, we know ships are even larger, and only 1 ship is allowed to dock at the time in our harbor. to prevent these kinds of accidents. Approximately 20 minutes later, at 9:04 a.m., the Mont Blanc exploded, obliterating Halifax and the Dartmouth Harbor. Now, if you were to look at a map, the site of the explosion was in the middle of the two bridges. For my Halifax listeners, you will know the area well. Ground Zero was on the Halifax side, around the now Irving shipyard. The blast affected an 800-meter radius, destroying structures, snapping trees, bending rails, and spreading debris for several kilometers. The anchor of the Mont Blanc was found a few kilometers away from the blast zone. People felt this explosion up to 300 miles away. This would include most of the province and parts of New Brunswick and even Prince Edward Island. The area of the north end, which is where the shipyard is, and up to Hydrostone was completely obliterated. This was called the area of devastation. The distance from there to the Halifax Forum, North Street to Windsor Street Exchange, was destroyed. And also, because of the explosion, a tsunami appeared in the harbor. Both the Halifax side, where the area of devastation was, and on the other side of the harbor, Dartmouth, was affected by it. The tsunami reached as far as Windmill Road. The explosion would have affected this area as well. However, the Halifax side of the city received the most damage. As I'm describing this, I have two maps up comparing the two areas with now and then. It's crazy to think if you were walking around in these areas, you would never know an explosion decimated it at one time. The explosion killed nearly 2,000 people, 9,000 were injured, and 25,000 were left homeless. If you grew up watching Canada Heritage Moments, you might even remember the story of Vince Coleman. He was a train dispatcher that sacrificed himself to stop a train that was arriving at the city. Coleman sent a Morse code message warning of the ship's pending destruction. His message was received in time and he saved 300 people. Halifax required multiple years to recover from the extent of destruction it had experienced. And during this time, though, John Snow & Co. Funeral Home was one of the major locations for where all the bodies were held. They were also sent to schools and churches for the time being, till burials could also be arranged, as there was not enough room in the funeral home. The local paper at the time shared an image of rows and rows of coffins lined up outside the funeral home, which is now what we know as the Five Fishermen today. Just like the time of the Titanic, some of these spirits never moved on and remain at the location as of today. But before we go back to the fishermen, let's dive into two spots with ghostly activity because of these events. The area where the Fairview Lawn Cemetery resides is split into three separate cemeteries. The first one is St. John's. This one you can see if you drove past on the Bedford Highway immediately as you left the Windsor Street Exchange. This is your average run-of-the-mill gravesite, where it's still used today. The next one is the Fairview Lawn, where you can find the graves of the Halifax explosion victims. And the final one is the Titanic gravesite. This is the largest collection of graves for the Titanic victims worldwide. These two memorial sites honor the fallen victims for all to pay their respects. This place provides what's considered a dual historical perspective. In total, there's 20 hectares or 49 acres of cemetery in this area, 121 graves for the explosion site, 150 graves in Titanic, and over 12,000 graves in St. John's. That's a lot of bodies buried in one spot. Many have reported ghostly orbs, shadowy figures, full body apparitions, and even disembodied voices throughout this area. This may not be a place you want to be, especially at night and alone. During October to December, though, Halifax hosts many ghost tours throughout the city. This is one of those places. Here you'll hear the tale of all the stories I've mentioned and more. Some have even felt the presence of others join them as they walk down the paths. Many have captured photos of unknown shapes and orbs floating about. I, myself, would love to plan on heading here one evening just to see the sights and hopefully see something. Another creepy location is the Veith House in the North End. The Veith House was a Protestant orphanage before the explosion. Its foundation dates back to the 1800s, most notably 1857. This place was for refuge for orphan children. Besides being a home, it was also a place of education and moral guidance for these children. It was unfortunately destroyed during the explosion, but was rebuilt. It evolved from an orphanage to a now community hub, providing various services and programs. Today, its mission is to meet the needs for children, for families, and individuals with empowerment as its goal. It's a safe, accessible space for all, for those suffering from poverty and food insecurity, to strengthening the surrounding community and its peoples. This place isn't just for children, though, but for adults as well. During the explosion, 24 children and 3 staff members unfortunately perished here. It's been reported that the spirit of a child is often seen roaming its halls and even looking out its windows with a look of sorrow. Others have reported seeing a matriarch that worked at the school roam its halls. You can find this place on Beef Street, just up from Barrington Street, next to the Irving Shipyard. Just look for the big white house with a green door and a sign, Veith House, above it. Now let's make our way back downtown toward the Five Fishermen. Across the street is the St. Paul Anglican Church, built in 1750, just 1 year after the founding of Halifax. It's the oldest standing structure in the city and the oldest Anglican church in Canada. It's famous not only for its religion, but also for the deacon. When the explosion happened, the deacon at the time was killed because of the immense heat. Due to this heat, his body was etched into one of the windows. If you were to head to Argyle Street and look up to the second story, you could clearly see the shape of a man in the window. It's said that this window has been replaced many times, but each time the face would reappear. As of this, it's been left alone for all those who walk past to gaze upon it. Now for our final location, the Five Fisherman Restaurant. As I mentioned in the beginning, this place has a lot of activity throughout its walls. Orbs, apparitions, mysterious sounds, and more lurk here. Staff have claimed that they've seen dishes fly off the shelves and tables, glasses and plates smashed, utensils thrown off tables, lights flicker and turn off. It's even been reported that staff would often see someone sitting at a table waiting to be served, but when they approach the table, the person is gone. This has also been claimed by guests as well. It's also been reported to see figures in old Victorian clothes seen walking throughout its halls. After closing, the activity tends to be more noticeable though, as during regular hours, as it's kind of hard to see these things when, you have a house full of people. However, the dishes being thrown happens frequently for staff and guests. Many paranormal investigations have been conducted proving something eerie goes down here. Other than the ghosts, come here for the food. As I mentioned, it's here you can get locally bought seafood and meats. If you happen to see someone not at this time, don't be afraid. They're just here for the food as well. I want to mention a couple more things before we end this story. There are several other haunted locations throughout Halifax that aren't because of these past events. Like I said in my first episode, Citadel Hill is full of this activity. Alexander Keith's brewery is known to see the spirit of Mr. Keith himself roam the halls. If you head to Dalhousie, Sheriff Hall has a few spirits. One named Penelope haunts the upper floors near the clock tower. The famous Neptune Theatre is also known for a few spirits, and some even still perform on the stage after hours. But I'll be coming back to these stories and more in later episodes. And that is this week's episode on the Five Fisherman Restaurant, the Halifax explosion, and the ghosts of Halifax. Join me every Saturday as I take you on more creepy and terrifying stories in Canada and beyond its borders. If you have any stories you wish for me to explore, feel free to email me at northernnightmares@outlook.com. Hit that subscribe button to get notified when new episodes drop. Next week, I'll be doing our first 3-part series on a story a little different than what I've normally done. However, I'm sure you'll enjoy the history of this subject. You may even say we're hellbound for this tale. I'll see you soon. Have a good night, and remember, nightmares are closer than you think.